everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. We are going to let people continue to trickle in. And as we do, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the panelists who will be joining us today. So we are, well, for one thing, my name is Courtney Raymond. I'm a marketing manager at OpenStax, and I'm joined by Laura Elliott, who is the VP of Sales at panOpen. And then we are grateful to be joined by 4 faculty members who teach anatomy and physiology, who will be leading and having the discussion around what does it mean to teach A&P in a time of uncertainty. So first of all, we have Dr. Dawn Tamarkin, who is a biology professor and chairperson of the Department of Mathematics and Natural Sciences at National University, which is based in San Diego, or she's based in San Diego, California. She graduated with honors from Union College with a BS in biology and earned her PhD in neuroscience with a minor in physiology from the University of Arizona. Prior to her recent move to National University, she was a biology professor at Springfield Technical Community College in Springfield, Massachusetts for 24 years. She's been teaching anatomy and physiology for over 25 years, including teaching through a hybrid format back in the late 90s, and more recently online, of course, during the pandemic. She's involved in biology education research and is committed to promoting universal design for learning, as well as using a UDL approach in her classes. We're also joined by Dr. Brent, who is an anatomy and physiology assistant teaching professor at University of Massachusetts, Lowell. Brent double majored in biology and psychology in his undergraduate degree at University of North Texas and received a PhD in biomedical sciences from UNT Health Science Center. Prior to joining UML, he was instructor for the Joint Admission Medical Program, teaching pre-medical undergraduates about cardiopulmonary physiology at the University of North Texas Health Science Center. His graduate research focused on the neurophysiology behind autonomic control of blood pressure. We also have Dr. Frank O'Neill. He is a biology and sports medicine instructor at WITCC. He has 14 years of experience teaching face-to-face, hybrid, and online courses. He's been awarded multiple teaching awards at the college, state, and national level, including the 2013 and 2020 Western Iowa Tech Community College Outstanding Teacher of the Year Award, the 2014 and 2019 National Institute for Staff and Organizational Development Excellence Award, and the 2019 Iowa Community College Online Consortium E11 Excellence in Online Instruction Award. Dr. O'Neill received his Doctor of Chiropractic and a BS in Human Biology from Northwestern Health Sciences University in 2001. He also completed his certified online instructor training from the Learning Resources Network in 2017. And then finally, we're joined by Elizabeth Fitch, who is going to be our moderator in the discussion today. She is an associate professor of biology at Motlow State Community College's Smyrna campus, located in Rutherford County, Tennessee. She holds a Master of Science degree in biology from Middle Tennessee State University and a Bachelor of Arts in Fine Arts and Music from Kentucky Wesleyan College. She has served in both faculty and administrative roles, including serving as the Smyrna campus academic dean for 3 years, associate professor of biology for nearly 15 years, the Smyrna campus science coordinator for 8 years, and has taught various biology courses, including microbiology and general biology courses, and achieved tenure. As campus academic dean, she led a campus of over 3,000 students and oversaw all course scheduling and staffing, led and supervised full-time faculty of all academic disciplines, served as the administrative council chair for the college, and worked to develop new academic programs and workforce development initiatives at the Smyrna campus. So that is a mouthful because our speakers are very accomplished and we're really lucky to have them with us today. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. If you are late joining in, again, I'm Courtney Raymond. I'm the marketing manager at OpenStax, and Laura Elliott is joining us as the VP of Sales from panOpen, in addition to our 3 panelists and 1 moderator for our faculty discussion. Just as a note, you guys are on mute, but if you have any questions, please do feel free to share them. We do want to hear from you, and we want to be able to address those questions that we can, so you can always add those in the Q&A section of your Zoom window. We are also recording this webinar, so we are going to post it on panOpen. Will post it on their YouTube page, and it will be emailed out to all of the registrants tomorrow morning. So it will be available for you if you missed portions of it, or if you want to forward it to a colleague, it's available to you. So I'm going to move on to a brief overview of OpenStax for those of you who aren't familiar or just need a little brush up. It'll only take a couple minutes. So OpenStax is a publisher of open educational resources based at Rice University. After reading all those words, my tongue and brain aren't working as well anymore. So we are a part of a 501c3 nonprofit. We publish textbooks for the highest enrolled undergrad courses, and they're available completely free because of the open license. So it goes through the same peer review process and quality standards as traditional textbooks, but the open license means that instructors can remix, reuse them how they need to, completely free. And this year, 3.8 million students and 36,000 instructors are using our books at 60% of US degree granting institutions and in over 100 other countries as well. So on the next slide, just a brief overview of our anatomy and physiology text, which is within panOpen's platform as well. So this book was published in 2013, and we're working on a new edition, which will be released this year. We only do revisions when pedagogically necessary, so the book is available in its current edition as long as possible to students. The book was designed for the 2-semester A&P course for life science and allied health, but panOpen has also adapted it into a 1-semester option that they will be able to tell you more about. And it does come with free ancillary materials. And to access these, you only need to create a free instructor account on openstax.org. We'll verify you're an instructor, and then you'll be able to download. So for this book, you see a list here of what's available, but it includes a solution guide, PowerPoint deck, LMS cartridges, and more. And then just to give context on why we're here today with panOpen, they are an OpenStax ally, an official partner of ours. So we provide this openly licensed content, and then they offer low-cost, high-value learning technology to support instructors and students beyond what the content offers. So they enrich the OpenStax material, and then they also provide financial support, which is a really important part of our ecosystem that allows us to keep the books current and up to date at all times for students. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass over to Laura Elliott from panOpen.
Hi, and thank you for joining. My name is Laura Elliott, and I'm the Vice President of Sales and Partnerships for panOpen. One of the things that we've heard over the years, and as an OpenStax ally, is that we kind of take OER to that next level. We bring the interactive courseware that you're used to from commercial publishers, but we do it at a fraction of the cost. There's all kinds of the same tools that you would like to see with videos, slides, assessments, LMS integration, with some additional pieces like tech support, customer success to help you be successful in launching your courses as needed, and transition support. So if you're currently using something, but you want to transition over to using panOpen, we're able to help you do that through the use of our customer success group. We provide analytics, and the major piece that we bring is this learning in context. So dipping in and out of the content is somewhat disjointed for students. So we bring all the videos, the tests, the assessments, all of those assets right into the context of the material that you would use. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth Motlow, or Elizabeth Fitch from Motlow State, and she will be your moderator this afternoon. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Courtney. And I'll also just extend the thank you to panOpen and to OpenStax for hosting this discussion. Looking forward to the panelists. You've heard the introduction to that. And so the theme again, teaching science, or specifically A&P, in a time of uncertainty. So I imagine those of you who are on this webinar are interested in hearing the experiences, the perspective of those who have been teaching in this crisis. And at the end, we will, well, actually during the panel discussion, I'll be monitoring, I'll be your voice as the audience. I won't be answering questions as much as I will just be fielding and interjecting those to our panelists. So I'll get to as many as I can. We do have a lot of people on the webinar, but I'll interject those as we get to them. So with further ado, let's get started with a poll. And you should be taking a poll with a couple of questions. We'll let that ride for a couple of seconds. It's letting us know what teaching format that you're using. And then if you're doing online, what method. And the reason we want to do this is just so the panelists kind of have an idea of where the audience is coming from. We can shape our answers to questions to fit the group. So we'll give that a minute, and then when it comes through, we'll get Lindsay to share the results with us. All right. Okay, so number one, what teaching format are you using? We've got 0% in person, so keep that in mind, panelists. Nobody cares to know anything about on ground. And then online, and then we've got both. We have a mix there, so a little bit of on ground, but I'm assuming probably a lot of the interest is how do we shift and do this online effectively? What method are you using for online courses? We've got 27% asynchronous, which means they're probably not dedicated times, which is the synchronous group. We have 26%, so they probably Zoom lecture specific time with their class, both. So we've got a mix of people around 50%. So pretty much every delivery method online is what it sounds like. All right, well, thanks for sharing that with us. Let's go on, and our panelists are going to introduce, are we doing the slides for the introductions? Yeah, for Don and Brent and Frank. So let's go over their slides that they were going to do to just give us an overview of what their experience has been. Starting with
Hi,
Dawn.
everyone. I'm Dawn Tamarkin. So I'm at National University, which is based in San Diego. And just so you understand a little bit, because National University is a bit different, National University teaches classes in 4 weeks. Anatomy and physiology, the lab and the lecture combined are 8 weeks. So it's a little longer. But when there is any sort of uncertainty or issue that comes up, it takes a huge chunk of the time from our classes. So we've been really working hard to handle all of the challenges brought on through this pandemic. Our average age is 33. So when I came here from a community college, I felt very comfortable with our students right away. They also are just under half have a military affiliation, whether they're active duty veterans or military family. So I did want to tell you a little bit about some of the different kinds of challenges and ways we've been working on it. So as far as economic uncertainty through this time, one of the challenges is that there are haves and have-nots technologically. So you have students with high-speed internet and others without, and you have students with all sorts of computer equipment and others with very limited equipment. So when you are trying to teach a class, there are some things that you kind of need to do, or that I've needed to do, to work through and try to ensure that I'm giving everyone equal opportunities. For example, if you give a test with 50 multiple choice questions and each question loads separately on a screen, then any student with a slow internet speed is going to spend most of the timed period of the test waiting for the pages to load. So one of the ways that I've been working on that is to ensure that when questions show up, when a page loads, that there's more than one question, that they have fewer times when things have to load, to try to make sure that everybody has opportunity to express what they know about anatomy and physiology. There are also some other challenges with, if a student doesn't have a camera, for example, it's harder for them to get immersed in their conversations with their classmates online. So just providing enough opportunities for them to have conversations can really help with that. For social and cultural uncertainty, with all the upheaval that's been going on in our country, I found it very important to really develop a strong class community and to promote a growth mindset continually. Remind students that I know that they can succeed and that it's just a matter of finding what they need to do in order to be successful, not whether or not they just have it. And to develop a class community, there have been a bunch of things that I've done, but one thing we can all do is remind students that in anatomy and physiology, they have a common purpose to be in this class, right? All of our students are pre-health. They are all trying to improve their lives by getting into an allied health career program and change things for their future and for their family's future. Reminding them of their common purpose is very helpful in starting to develop a class community. There are a bunch of other ways to develop class community online with A&P. So when teaching synchronously, if you do polling questions, what I do is I wait for everyone to respond. They know that they all have to participate, and I encourage them to all participate. I switch out the breakout rooms a lot so that they have opportunities to find people that they enjoy working with. And if there's some people that they're not thrilled with working with, they're not in it that long. They're always timed, our breakout rooms. And one option also is I've used my on-site lab handouts as online activities when they're in these breakout rooms so that they can work together to come up with for each item that they have to learn about, not just what it is, but what its purpose is for the system that we're working on. And then they have to relate that back when we finish our breakout room. So we've had a lot of other challenges with health uncertainty. Our students are often frontline workers in health facilities, whether it's hospitals or nursing homes. And these students have often had to pick up extra shifts whenever they're called to do so. And they're the ones who are working with the sickest people, and they're exposed, and there's a lot of fear. And so just in order to make sure that our students know that we support them, we've had to be a lot more flexible with our classes, a lot more recording of lectures, ensuring that our students get some verbal, whether it's email or a chat support from us, from their classmates. I know I'm running out of time because we each have just a little bit of time, but I wanted to bring up also just the fact that throughout this entire time, our adjuncts have been going through very similar situations to our students. Very often adjuncts have economic uncertainty as part of their lives, and it's just been made worse through this whole pandemic. So being supportive for our adjuncts and ensuring that they have the materials that they need so that they don't have to work crazy number of hours for the pay that they receive to be successful in teaching our students. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Those are good comments. Thank you, Dawn. Let's move on, and I think we'll hear from Dr. Lowell next. You're muted.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you inviting me. I'm thankful to be here. So I am Brent Shell. I am an assistant teaching professor at University of Massachusetts Lowell, and University of Massachusetts Lowell is a four-year institution. And so the cohort of students who are arriving to take anatomy and physiology are recent high school graduates entering into their first year of university. And so when we transitioned at the start of the pandemic and I had to start thinking about what changes would happen, like Dawn, I also started thinking about the sense of community that we develop in the classroom. And so what could I do to help make up for what the students lost? What could I do to help restore a little bit of that certainty to give them something that somewhat appeared like what they expected or what they had been used to? And so I too thought about this and thinking about economics. What resources had we lost at the university? What resources had the students lost personally? And so I too started focusing on the no cost and low cost resources. And I turned to open educational resources and creatively commons material. That way I could hopefully find things to create some semblance of what they had before. And I actually found that there were a lot of resources available that I hadn't been using before simply because I hadn't needed to search for them. And so the primary thing that stuck out was how lab would work in this new environment. And so I started searching for ways that students could have something similar to what we have, to where we'd sit down with models and have them work through them, to where they could sit down and freely work through something in their hands or work through a dissection. And I started looking for 3D models to give them some semblance of what they had before. And that's actually what I have shown here. So you can see I have something that's rotating on a fixed axis, right? The cervical vertebrae there. But loaded into a presentation, students could actually sit down and just freely rotate this and decide discuss it with one another, load it into an LMS. They could sit down and have this available during class, after class, whenever they're able to access it. And they could also download it. That way they'd have it even if they don't have a connection. And I found that this amazingly is actually just preloaded into Microsoft PowerPoint, but there are a lot of universities that have taken things like CT scans and MRIs and created 3D models from these and then released them under Creative Commons. And so as long as you obey the license and attribute them appropriately, you can use this and your students can use this. This can be a part of your coursework. It doesn't make up for what they've lost, but it gets them closer to the experience they expect, and it allows them to have access to it all the time, whenever is convenient for them. So then I started thinking about what's on the students' minds, and they're very concerned about their health and their loved ones' health, and that's understandable. And it's also very confusing right now because a lot of what we're hearing are things that people aren't typically familiar with. And so making sure that I connect these things to what we discuss in class and reinforce why they're so important has been really critical to help students explore everything that's going on. So making sure that I'm connecting what's occurring in the news or what they hear about the pandemic has been really critical. And one example that comes up, because this just occurred recently, talking about the respiratory system. Students hear about COVID pneumonia, or they may have heard about pneumonia in the context of influenza and flu shots previously. And so making sure I draw that connection and discuss the critical importance of the respiratory membrane and talk about how this relates to that function, it makes students very invested in the material, but it also gives them this avenue of how to interpret the news that they're hearing and how to gauge the importance of everything that they're hearing so that they understand when they hear COVID pneumonia, what that means and why it's so important that we're discussing it. And then the last thing, as Dawn mentioned as well, socially and politically, it's been a difficult time for everyone in the past few years. So making sure that students know that there's assistance available to them and also helping them to find a space that matches their experience so that they can work through what's going on has been really important too. And this means that I have to think about the fact that I haven't had the same experience as my students, but I can try and help and find someone who has, so they have someone to discuss with or some outlet so that they can work through this. And I can do that locally, but I've also started turning to organizations and societies that I'm a part of because they've had some really great programming. And one example off the top of my head is the American Physiological Society has had a great series on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so this is something that I could connect a student to that would help them both think about science and anatomy and physiology, but also give them a lens in which to view the world and see people who have had a similar experience that they have. The other thing I always like to include is making sure my students know about assistance, whether that's assistance at the university level, assistance at the community level, or assistance at the national level. So in my class, and we discuss this, and I make sure I include it in my LMS as well, is making sure students know about the crisis text line, making sure that they know about National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and making sure they know about the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. That way students know that there is a safety net. This is a stressful time. There are places you can call, there are things you can do, there are people out there that are there to help. And so that helps to rebuild that sense of community. You get that when you're sitting there in person, when you're discussing people, when you have this organic interaction. And so I've been trying to recreate that aspect, even though we're online, to give them opportunities to engage with one another and to give them a lens in which to view the world while also letting them know that that safety net still exists. So I will pass it off to Frank to share his experiences. I'm sorry.
Brent, I'll just make a quick question in here. You were talking in your 3D models, got some folks interested. Do you have a quick resource you can share with people watching?
Yeah, so the NIH has a resource for you can 3D print things. You can use those as 3D models. And then the universities that I was talking about share their 3D models on Sketchfab. Just search for the Creative Commons ones. You can find Creative Commons models from there. And Sketchfab allows you to embed it in your LMS too.
Awesome, great, thanks. Now we'll move on to Dr. Frank O'Neill.
Give me just a second, I gotta write that down. So I'm gonna check those resources out for sure. So I'm Frank O'Neill from Western Iowa Tech Community College. So my student population is a little older, usually around 26. We do have more students below the poverty line than any other community college in the state of Iowa. So that's kind of the lens that I see these things through. So I like to talk a lot about relationships and connecting with students. So it's been very difficult, but we go back to March 11th was the last time I was on campus until August 20th. And March 12th, I had to turn all of my classes into online courses. And thankfully we had a week because of spring break. And I also became a kindergarten teacher to my son, Oliver, on March 12th. And then as you go through the year, everyone in my family got COVID. And my stepdaughter has gotten COVID 2 times now. She got it 3 months and 2 days after the first time she was diagnosed. And when I got COVID, I was sick for a month, and I'm still having post-COVID symptoms. I have not recovered. So I'm not saying this for sympathy. I'm saying that to say this. I needed a break, and I needed people to cut me some slack sometime. And my golden rule is that I cannot hold my students to a higher standard than I can hold myself. So if I needed this, imagine what my students were going through, right? My wife and I didn't lose our jobs. No one was hospitalized, things like this. So students, especially students working in nursing homes, they were going through things that I still can't imagine. But I felt like I had to be able to be willing to be more flexible with them because I needed the same for myself. So that's the first thing I would say is we just don't have the right to hold our students to a higher standard than we can hold ourselves. Number two, so how was I going to connect with students in a new environment? So as I created these online courses, and thankfully, I had been teaching online for years, so I had a huge head start compared to a lot of my colleagues. But if I couldn't bring my students to the classroom and I couldn't bring them to the lab, then my job was to bring those elements to them. So what I looked a week at a time, basically, I looked at what were we going to cover and how can I connect my students to that material and meet the same learning objectives in this new online environment. The first thing I had to do was teach a lot of my students how to be online students. I think that's something that we need to just talk about. And like Dawn said with the growth mindset, I had to teach my students that they could succeed in this new world and in this new environment. And then I had to look for ways to recreate the best things about the face-to-face classroom. So I turned to a lot of videos, simulations, case studies. I tried to find as many ways as I could to complete the same objectives that I would have in the face-to-face environment. Then my last point here is it's okay to curate content and then create it, right? That's how I found OpenStax. That's how I found a bunch of the resources that I work with. Personally, I like making videos. I've made hundreds of videos. That's something that I like to do because I like that kind of personal connection piece. But I completely understand if not everyone wants to devote 10 to 15 hours a week to making videos like I do. So it's okay to go and find resources and then fill in the gaps with things that only you can do. So if I'm trying to replace a spirometry simulation, for example, or a spirometry lab, for example, I will go and look for, are there any pre-existing spirometry simulations that will work? And if they will, I will build off of those things. So I think that we need to make sure that we're connecting with our students and finding just as many ways to do so as we would have in the face-to-face environment. We're giving our students every resource they need to succeed, whether they're in the face-to-face or online environment. And then we're looking for help ourselves, whether that be social and emotional help for us, or even just help finding resources and not recreating the wheel if we don't need to. All right, I think that's all I have for now.
All right, Frank, thank you. That you made some powerful comments. All of you made really great comments. We can move on to some discussion and questions now. I will interject one from the audience before we look at some of the ones we had prepared. Any thoughts from any of you that you'd like to share about the impacts of proctoring tools like Procterio on the impacts on like equity for students? What are you thinking about proctored exams? What are your experiences? Anything significant you'd like to share with folks?
Well, we actually don't use any of those proctoring tools at National University, and we have had some challenges with cheating because we don't have a proctoring method. There are some that you can do, things that some of our instructors just do on their own, like synchronous assessments with cameras on. But that requires that all your students have cameras, and they don't actually all have cameras. So it's a difficult situation, and we're looking into some options, especially for non-A&P classes. But for the most part, what we're doing is writing our own assessments and developing more and more assessments, which again is a huge time sink. I mean, we're all making videos of things. We're all trying to support our students by finding all these resources. And now we're all writing our own assessments, and there's only so much time in the day. So I don't know if either of you guys can speak to proctoring tools.
Yeah, I can. We rely on the HonorLock remote proctoring service. The nice thing at Western Iowa Tech, though, is every student is given a Mac, and then students were able to even check out Wi-Fi's if they didn't have it. There were Wi-Fi hotspots set up in the parking lots of the college campuses. So I would say for about 97 or 98% of students, we could use Honor Lock, and we could find ways to make that work. For the other 1, 2, 3% of students where occasionally we just had these serious issues, then I would use something else. Like Dawn had said, maybe an alternate assessment, maybe a synchronous exam where I'm actually there watching them over Zoom. But that's how we handled it. But we also had that luxury where we knew every student had a Mac, and we knew that we were able to get Wi-Fi to every student as well.
So I can say that we don't use a proctoring service for our anatomy and physiology courses. And we also don't have a common supply of what the students are going to be using. So some students are using laptops, some students are using PCs, some students are doing a lot of the work significantly on their phone because they're not near a computer they can sit at. My primary concern would be that if the student is using that computer for everything they need on their day-to-day basis, their finances, their health, everything they need, adding the software on there, it would need to be a very secure software solution. And any bugs in the software would expose potentially private data from the student. So unless they have a dedicated device that's meant for class, I would be concerned about the safety implications.
Thanks for all those answers. Those are good points. And several of you have mentioned making videos for your students, recording lectures and small. So one of our audience listeners, we want to know, what are you using to make those videos?
I'll start with that. So I use PowerPoint to design what I want to have because it's easy for me to set up the animation. And then I actually record my audio in an open source program, but you can record it directly in PowerPoint as well. And then I create the video and re-encode it using some open source software called Handbrake as well. So I use a couple of open source softwares, and then I use PowerPoint largely to make that happen for the basic like speak over videos.
All right, I actually use Camtasia. So it's a screen capture recording software. I think it has very robust editing tools for what I need. It doesn't edit audio, so I make sure that the audio is high quality before I begin. But yeah, I actually start with PowerPoint, same thing. And then there's a PowerPoint add-on that allows me to record straight to Camtasia and edit from there. And then I publish it. I publish them usually as unlisted YouTube videos, which allows me to give Google a crack at the closed captioning, and then I can go in and clean it up rather than starting from scratch.
So at National, we have a video team, although they have been limited because of the pandemic. So to reduce exposure, we haven't been able to make many videos with them. So we have made some videos with really nice cameras and people who do nice video editing. But in addition, we've done some Zoom videos, we've done Camtasia videos, and also used Kaltura for putting the videos together. So a variety of different methods. One of my colleagues recently started using BioRender, which is a program you can purchase to add really nice little drawings of all sorts of cellular components so that you don't have to draw everything from scratch. And they do have a 2-week free trial. So if you know what you want to do, you can at least add that stuff in 2 weeks and not pay anything. But that's how we make our videos typically.
Have you all noticed, is there issues? A lot of students access the classes with their telephones and other devices and stuff. And as you're creating videos, and as you may or may not use proctored services for exams, what's been your experience with technology limitations with students, and what can you recommend?
So my recommendation is to always have some kind of asynchronous element. That way, when students have a good connection or they have the ability to download what they need, it gives them the opportunity to have that and then have it locally. So maybe that day their connection is poor, right? We can't all predict when our connection will be good and when we're having issues. So making sure that they could download something and have it locally available on their phone. I've had students who download a lecture and then listen to it like a podcast when they're in their car driving to or from work, or maybe when they're in between shifts or something like that. So just making sure that there's something asynchronous that they have access to has really been useful for a lot of my students who may have issues with a reliable connection, or maybe just issues with reliable timing as well.
I'll say that trying to look at anatomy and physiology images, drawings, histology on a phone is a real challenge. When the screen is that small and you have a detailed image, it really doesn't fit very well. So again, like what Brent was saying, for our assessments, we give them 48 hours to complete them so they can find a time within that period to be able to have a quiet space, have some technology that's reliable where they can see something larger than this.
Great, thanks. Frank, comment on that? We do have a question for you once you get finished.
Sure. Yeah, I think that whenever possible, I try to make sure there are options. So if I'm completing or working on a lab simulation, if I can find 2 or 3 options, I'll try to make sure that at least one of them would allow to use. So they may not have the option to use everything that I share, but I try to at least something will work for them. And sometimes, obviously, Flash was a big issue last year. So what I would do if there were technology issues, and again, it took more time for me, but if I had a simulation that I really thought was helpful, but I had a large handful of students that just couldn't access it at least easily, right? I know that they had the Mac, but many of them were doing things on their phone. So what I would do is I would actually record myself going through these simulations, and then I would caption those, and then I would share those. So it wasn't ideal, but I always had to make sure that a student did have an alternative.
And that plays in well to the question that one of our listeners wanted to ask you. They say, Dr. Frank O'Neill, which programs are you using when you're creating your simulations?
So I have started to work with people that have skills than me using things like Storyline, but for the huge majority of simulations, I've just curated. I'm able to find a lot of resources that are freely available. So the simulations that I've created are very, very rudimentary, and Storyline's very expensive. So drawback there.
Right. All right. This one, anybody can answer this one that feels compelled to do so. How do you suggest dealing with catching up with individual students who miss 3 to 4 weeks of the course, including labs, when they get sick? And this person's saying, since spring 2020, the flexibility offered by institutions has meant that we need to do a lot of extra during free time. And then internet instability has also been another huge issue where students are missing assignments or exams because of internet connections. So any advice for the people listening or some shared experiences?
Well, in 3 to 4 weeks, our whole class is over at National University. I mean, for anatomy and physiology, it's half over. So we haven't really had the situation show up where a student missed half the class for that reason. I did have a student who had a child who, in order to have childcare so that she could work, she had to have childcare in one of the evenings of my class. And so she missed half of the classes because of childcare issues, because that was when she could get childcare so she could work. And every once in a while I could see her phone pop up in our class and then it would go away again. And she just did the whole thing remotely. But I didn't have that entirely rescheduling happening at National in any of our A&P classes. I guess we were very lucky.
We've had students who are deployed via the National Guard or who may have had a prolonged illness, and so that required them to miss a significant portion of class, either because they just didn't have the capacity to deal with that and what was going on in their lives, or maybe they just didn't have access because of where they were located at that time. So it kind of is a situation by situation basis. I don't think there's a one size fits all kind of solution here. Some students simply aren't going to have the time to make that up, and will require an incomplete. And so I would definitely refresh yourself on incomplete policies. That's something that I've had to do to make sure that I'm familiar with what happens with National Guard deployment or with military deployment, what happens with medical leave that has to be associated with an illness. And so I've just been handling it a case by case basis and been discussing it with colleagues of mine as to what they recommend, since a lot of them have more experience with this, since I'm a newer professor. So I've definitely leaned heavily upon my colleagues for their advice.
Yeah, I agree with Brent for sure. Still take by case basis. I know the line has moved, right? There has to be a line where we say we just cannot accommodate you any further. But I've had students that have been deployed and students that have been hospitalized with COVID. Like I'm going to extend them every opportunity that I can. And I do think, we definitely have had more incomplete, and I think that's fine too.
It's definitely something we can all commiserate with, is the unique situations that arise, and it's definitely more frequent with the past year. Many of you have mentioned recording lectures, posting videos, and we have someone's wanting to know, are you aware of any data that supports the emphasis on lecture and the correlation to effectiveness in online teaching?
I can speak to that. It doesn't always promising as someone like me would hope, right? I've been recording videos since 2013. My students have watched somewhere around 9,000 hours of the videos that I've produced. And what I would say, and this is of course anecdotal, I can't always see changes in the grades, but I see huge changes in how the students feel about the course, how they feel about their relationship with me and their connection with me. So to me, even all things being equal, it's still worth the time to create and utilize videos because of how it impacts my relationship with the students. I think it's really important. The videos are very short, to the point. I don't cover, I don't record long lectures. It's one topic at a time. And also try to make sure that the videos are really impactful. And if they watch the videos, the students know they're going to get something out of it and be worth their time. I don't think the evidence is, like I said, as promising as I'd like to think, like to see, but I still see a tremendous amount of value there.
I'd like to add that although at National, we have these 4.5-hour classes. So when I said I have a 4.5-hour lecture or a lecture and I record it, it's not a true lecture. I mean, it's an active experience, I hope, for students. It's full of questions that I ask, that I get their feedback on, lots of polling questions, lots of breakout rooms. And so the students who miss, they just want to know what the experience was that they missed. They want to make sure that they know what they need to catch up on. And so that's what the recording is for. It's not because I'm going to say something perfect. Clearly, that's not the case, and that they need to write it down. It's instead that they are with their classmates. They know what's going on with their classmates, and it keeps them part of that community. So we're not talking about, straight lectures that are crazy long. We're talking about interactive things or short lectures, I think, all of us.
Just to kind of add to that, do you recommend posting a 1.5-hour lecture, or should breaking it up is more effective?
Right.
Okay.
We've just developed some online asynchronous A&P classes at National, and we were trying to keep any lecture materials for the students to watch under 20 minutes. There's an occasional one that gets a little longer than that, but really 10 minutes to 15 minutes is probably best. That's about what a student can work with. But I wouldn't go, 45 minutes to an hour on anything that's a specific video like that.
Right. That's been in my experience too. They just don't, the stats show that they don't watch them. I don't know if your dashboard shows, but it will show me if they're watching them or not. And then, you know, if I poured in the time, sometimes I'm like, they didn't even watch it. So I think shorter and sweeter is probably better, but that can be hard to balance too when you've got a lot of information to cover. Just still listening on the webinar, we do have the chat disabled, but the Q&A, the questions, you can put your questions in if you're wanting to ask the panelists questions, and I will be your voice as best I can to get to through these questions. Have any experience flipping the virtual classroom and using peer instruction? And if you have, what's your success with that? We had no takers on that one. I'll take it as a no then. We don't have a lot of experience. Maybe Frank, okay.
Could you just repeat that again? I'm sorry, actually you cut out.
I'm sorry, okay. So any experience with flipping the virtual classroom and using peer instruction?
So this is something that our classes are large. So my classes tend to be, you know, approaching 100 or slightly over 100 students, which can make that difficult. And in smaller sections, so like in labs, it's a little bit easier to have students be able to show other students and work through the anatomy or work through a process together. I tend to find it's easier in smaller settings. It's definitely something that I use when students come to office hours, where I'll have them explain topics to one another. And then that way we can all evaluate, you know, did all that make sense? Is that all working? Case studies, that tends to work, because when people can be like, this is my understanding of how this case study worked and what was the mechanism behind it. But I find it's difficult to implement that when the class size is so large.
I'd like to add, I mean, I think that the reason that I slowed down a little in answering was the idea of flipping, because I don't have it truly flipped my classes. But there are plenty of opportunities that we can create for students to teach one another. And I had mentioned using a lab handout in a breakout room. I just remember one time when I did that and I was doing the respiratory system and esophagus was on the list because, you know, it's always discussed when you're mentioning the respiratory system about its proximity to the trachea. So the students had to go through everything on the list and come up with what is the function of each item to the respiratory system. And then they did this all in breakout rooms and they were all working on it themselves and teaching one another. And when I got to the esophagus, I said, who wants to do that? There was like this quiet and nobody was willing to explain it. And somebody finally said, well, I thought this would be easy, but I can't figure out what respiratory role it has. Our group couldn't figure it out. So it became a really fun conversation because it's okay to not know what the right answer is and not be able to figure it out with your group. So there's a lot of ways the groups can teach each other. I just went through everything, check, just to make sure everyone was on the same page after having worked with their group so that they understood what the functions were.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, I can add to this too. Yes, I have flipped entire classes before, including my anatomy and physiology courses. So, but when the students get together, especially now, you know, like Brent had said, in the face-to-face classroom environment and the lab, this would have been a little easier. I have smaller classes than him as well. But now it's with the Zoom breakout rooms. So primarily I do this with content that the students should have already covered before coming to that session. And then case studies are a phenomenal way to do that. Have students work through a case study, then they come back to the larger group to share their answers.
I'm glad you brought up case studies. What resources? Someone's asking, what resources are you using for case studies?
I like to create my own whenever possible because so many of them, the answers have gotten out onto the internet, but I still use quite a few that I find. I wish I could remember the name of the location. I get a lot of my case studies from the University of Buffalo. They have a huge case study database. I just can't remember what that group is called, but that's a phenomenal place to start. I think for $25 a year, you can get access to all their case studies for free, but you can get access to all their other tools and resources for $25 a year. So just Google case studies, University of Buffalo, and I promise it'll pop up.
Case studies at University of, it cut out for me. I don't know if it cut.
Buffalo, University of Buffalo.
Okay. Okay. Do any of you have any how to best caption videos? Someone saying Camtasia does it. I don't know if they've seen the option, but is there any advice on that?
YouTube will give you a basic output of a caption as best it can. So if you upload a video, even if it's not shared, it'll give you something that you could start with and download. I actually just tend to write a script for a video to make sure that it's captioned correctly, because no matter what automated caption software is used, it's definitely going to struggle with some of the biological terms, and its best guess can sometimes be very weird things. So I tend to just write a script and then go off of that, and then let something like YouTube do the synchronizing. It's really good at synchronizing. It's really bad at figuring out what the words were.
So I definitely can't do scripts. I respect that you can. It just makes me sound kind of robotic. So I'm definitely more off the cuff, which then means I have to deal with it up on the tail end. So I will let YouTube take a crack, and it does a decent job. It's definitely easier than starting from scratch. But then I actually use Dragon dictation software, and it was expensive. So I think it was around $300 for the version that I use. But what I love about it is I can actually extract the audio from either from the YouTube video or Camtasia, and then Dragon will listen to it, and it will transcribe it. And so it definitely, with training, does a better job than Google. So I'll have to go in and clean up a few things, but every time I use it, I train it with the new vocabulary, and it's getting better and better. So I'm hoping to reach a point where 95+% of what I say is actually captioned correctly with Dragon.
Nice.
My university will plug in a script for me if I have a script. So that's lucky. It's just that we've tried every automated version, like Brent was saying, to get a script off the cuff. And it's just harder to fix their bad scripts than to write our own. So we've been writing our own, and some of my faculty use Kaltura for that.
Interesting. What about grading? Grading can be overwhelming in an online setting, especially with the asynchronous. We have some people listening who'd like some advice or shared experience on how you increased grading.
I think it depends on what the assessment is. So in A&P, what we tend to do is to have homeworks and quizzes and exams. And the homeworks are supposed to be experiences for the students and opportunities for learning. They're not supposed to be, sorry.
That's fine. Happens.
They're not supposed to be high stakes assessments. So typically on homeworks, we let students do them as many times as they want until they get a score that they like. And this is whether we write it ourselves or whether we use one from a publisher or however it works. For quizzes and tests, that's not the case. We tend to have it be more of a high stakes assessment. And then it's either a very limited number of short answers or essay types or none, depending on the assessment. So to avoid that, what we've been doing is creating question sets so that, for example, instead of a whole pool for a topic, take the topic and break it out into subtopics and subtopics. And you want to assess each of those. So have 3 to 5 questions for each of those specific concepts that you need to assess. And then it rotates through those randomly and picks for the students so that every single subtopic they're tested on. And it's not that they get 5 questions just on epithelia and never see anything on connective tissue, right? So maybe they get 1 question on epithelial junctions and another question on epithelial function and another question on fiber types and connective tissue. But each one's a question set so that we can do the automated grading without a lot of long answers that are hard for everyone to grade equally and fairly.
Oh, that's good.
So I think it's important to remember that copy and paste is okay in certain situations. So if I'm grading a lab report or a paper or something, I'm not just going to copy and paste the same feedback, but I find myself saying the same thing over and over about a specific topic. And I think it's fine to start with kind of a template, and then you can add personal feedback to each individual student. But if I'm going to continue to share the same thought or same resource, then why not save time there so I can spend the majority of my time grading focusing on the personalized feedback. So I think you will notice that if you grade the same things over and over, that you can start with a template and then personalize it for each student, and that saves a lot of time.
I wanted to echo some of what Don said. We do a similar thing to where we have homework that they can repeat multiple times, and the homework is difficult, so no one gets it right the first time, but it is auto-graded, so the students work on it with other students, so they know the homework is going to take time, but if they work on it as a group, then it's something that they discuss, and they work through the answers, and it takes them multiple passes to get it all right, but they can all get the same, like, perfect score if they put the time in on it, and so that's a way that it makes them want to work with other people, and it's not a grading burden on us. That way, the grading burden can then be on the high stakes assessment where we'd have them potentially have a longer answer or have, very specific subtopics. So I think that's a great way, is to kind of divide what needs to be something that you sit down and spend a lot of time on versus what is something that you just want them to get practice with.
That's good advice on all counts. We're kind of getting close to the end of our time frame here, and has some final thoughts from the three of you. And I think Dawn, before we started the webinar, she had a question, or she was thinking about discussing labs and moving forward from labs in the future. And hopefully as we come out of the pandemic and we move back more into what we consider normal, how do you think all of this is going to impact teaching and labs specifically for A&P? And Dawn, if it was your question, I'll let you take it first.
Well, there's always been this necessity, right, for labs to be in person and on site. And I think with anatomy and physiology, there's a lot to be gained from all the hands-on experiences you can get by being together, by being on site. But I don't know that it's ever going to go fully back to only that. I just don't know whether schools like medical schools will ever accept online labs. I'm guessing probably not. There's still nursing schools that are thinking probably not. So I'm just wondering how much of this fully online lab we're going to be able to carry forward. And that's why I brought up the question. There are so many resources, and I think for sure all of our online experiences are going to contribute to what we do in the future and to opportunities we give to our students, like the online homework assignments. Those are great for whether you're on site or online, right? Those kinds of things where they can do them as many times as they want to learn the material. So I know Frank has been teaching online even longer and had some interest in answering this.
Yeah, thank you. So definitely, I don't think things will ever go back to quote unquote normal. I love some of the simulations and assignments that I'm using in the online environment now so much that they will be a part of the face-to-face environment as well. So if I found a simulation or some sort of activity that works really well, then I will have the students do it as to prepare them for the face-to-face lab. What I really wanted to say here is I think we have to be careful with what really matters in the lab. I love the lab. You all love the lab. You wouldn't be doing what you did if you didn't love these things. But it depends on how important the technical steps are in a lab, whether or not I really care, to be honest, if it's in the face-to-face or the online environment. My job is not to teach students how to complete labs. My job is to prepare them for their future. So the huge majority of my students are nursing students. So for example, if we had to move our microscope labs online, so we used microscope simulations. I created a series of tutorial videos where the students could see me using the microscopes that are in our lab. And then we use histology slides and all sorts of online resources. So the students are seeing what they would have seen through the microscope. They're seeing me and I'm teaching them how to use it. So the question is, how important is the art of using a microscope? And I know this is blasphemy, stick with me for a moment. My students move forward and they never touch a microscope again. My wife's a nurse practitioner. She's been in that field for 13 years. and she's never needed to use a microscope. So the question that I would posit to you is, no matter how much we love it, how important is that skill? And I think you can say the same thing with dissections. We dissected kidneys this week, and I love doing dissections. Many of the students love doing the dissections. But I'm not preparing a generation of fetal pig dissectors. I'm preparing the next generation of students, nursing students, and I do think we have to keep that in mind. So if a technical skill is important, like teaching a nursing student how to take blood pressure, that absolutely should be moved back to the face-to-face environment. So I could see courses where maybe they meet 2 or 4 times per month to cover the labs that absolutely should be covered in the laboratory environment, and the rest of the labs could still be online or something like that. So I think it's
really out there, Frank. I'd like to toss out there that sometimes it's not the actual microscope that's the important part. It's the fact that once you've learned how to use a microscope, you learn how to navigate through tissues and understand their structure. And that's harder to do without the microscope experience.
Completely.
So there are challenges, and what we're doing at National for that is we're coming up with some activities where students can click through and explore. So that's what we're working on, taking the zillion pictures over there with that microscope until we can get stuff for students to explore. So they need to be able to do the exploration themselves. And that's part of the scientific process. And that's exciting for students to be able to discover on their own.
Absolutely. And there are already some pretty decent microscope simulations out there. There are great histology slides that can be used online as well. So.
And actually the University of Michigan histology slides that are linked from the OER textbook, from the OpenStax textbook, the link doesn't work, but I'm sure that's being updated, but University of Michigan did update the site, so it's not a flash site. So they have really nice histological images. You just can't get there directly at the moment from the OpenStax textbook, but they're there. The same images that OpenStax uses.
Do you have any final comments you'd like to make on that topic?
I would like to point out that, because some people have asked things similar about access, when a student is a student with disabilities, or a student is non-traditional and maybe concerned about not fitting in, there are a lot of things that we can do to be inclusive rather than exclusive. And just being aware that that we can make a difference for any of our students in this online environment is really important, and that we have to be considerate of all types of students. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you. Any final thoughts or comments from you? And thank you so much for your time and expertise. But anything else you want to say before we say goodbye?
I did want to make one tiny comment on the lab thing. A lot of the discussion about the lab resources moving forward, a lot of the things we do in lab, we do a single time, right? You get in a single attempt at a lot of these things. And so I think a lot of the virtue of these online resources that we're using or developed is that they exist in perpetuity. So even though you can't go back and do the same lab again because you're not in the class anymore, it does give you a great way to review. If you've done it before and you can see it again, it's a great way to prepare you if you have to take a pathophysiology course, or if you have to take an upper level course that uses that same instrumentation or that same skill set. I think it's the best way for students to be able to look back and prepare.
I agree. Good comments and good discussion. I wish we could keep going. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but for everybody that's on this, we're on the contact page now where you can, if you want to reach out to Dawn, Frank, or even myself, and you want to ask us some questions. I think, Brent, there were some people that wanted those 3D sources again. They said you went a little bit fast, so you might get some emails. So if folks are wanting to get those resources, reach out to Brent. Thank you to panOpen and to OpenStax and to Paradigm. I wish we could have more conversations like this with professors across the country. I know we all long for it, and it's really, really helpful to hear each other's experiences and to commiserate together. And hopefully we can do something again soon. So thank all of you for being here.